working in a SOC or not. Okay, I've got a few. Hopefully this presentation will resonate with you. How many people here consider yourselves as developing tools or programs that will work in a SOC or not, or help analysts in that sense? A few more. Okay. So what I'm going to be talking about here is visualization and the use of visualization for helping to detect security events. I'm drawing from my own experience. Almost all the visualizations here that you'll see are from my background for things that I've developed. And as such, they were developed specifically for a SOC or not, but hopefully you'll be able to draw more general conclusions from what I'll be showing. And I'm going to start with a discussion of what is the problem, if it will switch for you as well. All right. So the problem is data. We have a lot of data, and the data is coming from all kinds of different places. So I'm showing some network logs here, just very simple NetFlow logs, actually not even the whole logs. You have logs coming from NetFlow, from servers, from firewalls, from security management devices, from desktops and laptops, and it can collect data from all kinds of different sources. And the question then becomes, what do you do with all this data? If you're a security analyst and you need to find some way to handle all of this data.
Stay this way.
Stay this way? Okay. If you have all this data, how is it that you can analyze all of it and find security events in it? And that's the basic problem that we're trying to solve. And then one of the answers for doing this, or one of the answers, what I thought was one of the answers, is the use of visualization. If I have all of this data, if I can put it into a visualization, then I might be able to go through it, use a person to go through it, and quickly detect things they should look at. And the reason for thinking this is people are very good at detecting patterns. And they're also very good at detecting when something doesn't match a pattern. And so if I can provide a visualization that shows all of this data in the right way, a person should be able to look at it and say, wait, there's something wrong here, let's take a look at what's happening. Now that has a couple of implications. One of those implications is that something that is malicious will also show up in the data as anomalous. Not necessarily a correct assumption, but at least a starting point that we can work from. What I'll be showing you are some of the visualizations that I've worked on. Some of the key requirements behind that is taking NetFlow data, so data that looked very much like this. And it had to be very, very scalable as one of the requirements. It's a visualization. It's supposed to be intuitive. It's supposed to be easy to use. If I show it to someone, they should know what to do with it. So how is it that you design with these kind of background in mind, and at the same time knowing that malicious and anomalous are not necessarily the same thing? And unlike most presentations, especially most academic ones, I'm going to actually start with what could we do wrong? And I'm going to start with all of the lessons that I learned from my background so that anyone else who's doing this does not make the same mistakes. And mistake number one, when we started working on this project, we assumed a complete system was needed. What do I mean by that? I thought, I'm going to develop a visualization system. I'm going to help people who are trying to do security, to have all of this different data. They're trying to look at it and find security events. And I'm going to do it from start to finish. You're going to go, sit down, you're going to launch your program. It'll give you a pretty visualization. You'll click someplace, that'll lead to some other visualization. You'll click on that and be able to drill down. This is actually a completely false assumption. If you are doing a visualization, do not build a whole system. The reason for that is if you're working in a SOC or with sysadmins, they have tools that they're using already. They're very comfortable with grep. Why should you not use grep? Is there any reason to not use grep? Grep is often the best tool to use. If you have some logs and you know what you're looking for, just quickly look for it. There's no reason to have the extra layer of using a visualization. And so this was a big mistake of me. We went and said, all right, we need a very complete system. What we're finding actually right now in the academic world is people are starting to go into SOCs and into NOCs and do anthropological studies, which is kind of scary because they're actually security people doing anthropological studies, but apart from that bit. We're actually trying to understand what is it that happens in there so we have a better idea of the flow, of the workflow, and can actually fit within that workflow. Mistake number 2, cool graphics. A friend of mine once said in a presentation, everyone will and should make at least one bad visualization in their life. So this is a bad visualization from my past. And the idea, this is a really cool tool from a visualization standpoint. You have this little cone thing, and it can show data based on how long the, if you have a long piece coming out, long and skinny, okay, you have a lot of data. For some reason, you had some sort of spike that happened in this one point. And you can grab the center and you can move it around so you can distort it. So you can see more detail on the side. So that's how you get this other image on the side. And it was really, really cool to play with. And it provided absolutely zero information for an analyst. So this is a big mistake. A lot of people who go in and start doing visualization stuff are like, okay, I'm going to do this really cool, pretty thing. And they don't actually take a step back and say, what is the problem we're trying to solve? What is it that we're actually trying to provide to the analyst so that they can do their job better? The assumption is visualizations will help, and so we automatically go into, and here's a really, really pretty one. And then we don't understand why it is no one uses it. Next mistake, visualizations without interpretation. I should have actually labeled this the eye candy chart. And the idea here is, oftentimes we'll do a visualization just because it looks nice. It's kind of like a cool graphics, but it's slightly different. We think we're actually providing some information with this. So in this case, it was, here are how many scans that are happening from all these different countries. And well, there's lots from, Canada and China and all of Europe is awful. Sorry, not Canada, US, not very many from Canada. We lied on that one. And the problem is, what can you do with this? What, as a security analyst, is actionable from this? What insights do you gain? And the problem is that there's not really anything you can do with this. The other problem being who's interested in scans anyway. But given that you have this information, what can you do with it? Now, there is actually a corollary to this. There is actually a value to what I call the eye candy chart. And the example that was given to me was actually a military example. There's a military base, and they had up on the wall a really nice chart that would show all kinds of things. Something like this, it might have been how many attacks were happening from different countries. And it wasn't anything the analysts used, but was from a particular program. And then some number of months later, you have a general, and he's sitting in there, and he's going through all the budget and going, well, what is this program? I don't know what that is. We can get rid of that and save the money from that. And someone spoke up and said, oh, well, that's the one that has the monitor up on the wall. It's like, oh, no, we can't cut that then. So the eye candy actually has a value because it shows some people visually what it is that you're working on. So it's not necessarily a value to the analyst, but don't always think in terms of what you're doing as being a value to the analyst. Sometimes there's a value if you go higher up the chain, even just in awareness of what you're working on. Next mistake, visualizations instead of signatures. This is actually a big mistake. So in this particular visualization, you have a 3D visualization, you have time across one axis, you have port numbers across the other axis, and you have the number of flows on the third axis. And what you're actually seeing here is that over time, how many different flows hit how many different ports. And you'll see there's this nice big spike that's kind of in gray at one particular point in time. And I think that was actually port 3306. I don't even remember what that was now, some number of years ago. But it's a very, very obvious thing. And so if you're looking at all your data over time, you can very obviously see this. And we had a really nice slider so you could go and select that port. You could drill down and look in 2 dimensions and see exactly what port it is and exactly what time. And this was all wonderful. But if you know that you're looking for something like all of a sudden there's a sharp increase in traffic, you need a nice 3-dimensional graph that you can grab and spin around to look at? Or is it possible to actually write a signature and have that signature be what you're looking for? And that way, if something happens and there's a sudden spike in the amount of traffic that I'm not expecting to see, my phone goes off, I get a text message, hey, take a look at this, there's a lot of unusual traffic on this port. As opposed to taking the time of a person who has to sit in front of a screen and watch something like this, either if it's updating constantly or even if they have to manually update it, but they're having to take their time to watch this. Why? And so that's one of the other problems we have with visualization. We provide visualizations without necessarily thinking of how we might provide this in a better way for people. And so this slide was blatantly stolen from Sophie Engel in one of her presentations, but she called this the Goldilocks principle. What happens with visualization? How is it that you can have a successful visualization? And there are really two issues that you need to deal with. One, your problems can't be too simple. Otherwise, what's the point of a visualization? And we saw this a lot early on in the academic literature. People would come up with visualizations for security, and they would show, hey, look, it detects port scans, or it will detect denial of, or it will detect denial of service attacks. I'm pretty sure most people can figure out how to detect a denial of service attack without needing to see a pretty graph to show them that a denial of service attack is happening, at least when you're looking at flooding attacks. So you don't want to take a problem that's too simple and then apply a visualization. There's no need. There are more simple ways of solving the problem. At the same time, you can't apply visualizations to problems that are too complex. And we actually rename that being problems that are too undefined. Oftentimes when you have a complex problem, it has not been broken down in such a way that you can say, and here's a good way to visualize the portion of it that we need to visualize. And so we say, hey, we have all of this, in our case, hey, we have all of this data, let's find security events in it. It's not a very well-defined problem at all. So in that case, visualization might be part of the solution, but it's not the solution, which goes back to the please don't create a whole entire system based around visualizations. So essentially what we're saying is that your problem has to be just right. That's the Goldilocks principle. So having said all of that, we did do some things right when we were working on this. So I have a few use cases to say, when is it that visualization is appropriate? And the first one is having a visualization for a specific goal. In this case, what we were doing is saying, you have time on one axis, you have IP addresses on your other axis. And what we've done is we've categorized all of the different IPs that we were looking at and assigned a color based on how we categorize them. We had 4 categories. We tried to figure out if something was a server, a client, or in between, acting as both. In the case of a server, we said, okay, if you're a server, then all you're doing, you should be sending traffic out. Sorry, receiving traffic in. Looking at who initiated the conversation. So if someone else initiates it and you're responding, you're a server. In the case of a client, we're looking the other direction. If I'm a client, I'm going to be sending traffic out and trying to connect to a server and getting something back. In the case of something acting as both, we broke it down 2 ways. In one case, we said, all right, you're acting as both a server and a client, you have outgoing and incoming, but you're using different ports. So that's probably okay. And in the last case, we said, oh, and you're using the same port. And that's kind of weird. It's not always kind of weird. And so you'll see we have 2, red was used for that one, and we have 2 red bars. One of those at least was the DNS server, I forget what the other was. So there are cases where you see all this red and you're like, that's fine, I know why that is. And you have other things that were acting completely as clients, so that green one was completely clients. The magenta and blue were kind of, either in between type stuff. The interesting thing is this one on the very end, and you can see it highlighted up there. And the interesting bit about this is it all of a sudden started changing color. So we didn't really care about the patterns that were created, the solid red lines, the solid green. What we cared about is all of a sudden something started changing its activity. So normally things acted like a client or they acted like a server. They acted consistently. So I always turn and look at you when it happens, right? And so you can use the visualization to say, wait a sec, all of a sudden this behavior has changed. And when we dug down into it, we actually found that that machine had been infected with something, and it started scanning all over the place, and that's why it ended up showing all this very different behavior. So we had a very specific goal in mind when we started looking for this visualization. We were trying to see when does something behavior change in such a way that you might not quickly notice it through a signature. Once you actually see this change, one of the depressing things about visualizations, my own personal belief on them, is you want to do a visualization and use it just enough to figure out how to not need it anymore and to write a signature so you never have to look at a visualization. So when you're working on visualizations, you're trying to do yourself out of a job. But the nice thing about this and the specific goal is, do we see a change in behavior? The other thing to note about this visualization, the other ones I showed were often looking at raw data. In this case, we pre-processed it. We put thought in there ahead of time, said, how is it that we can look at this information in such a way that we can get something back out of it? And thought, I know that sounds kind of weird, but we really need, when doing visualizations, to have a very thoughtful process behind it. How do we do this in such a way that we get the best results back? So this is data that was collected from a conference network. And all the blue, this is the same basic visualization. So this is a nice display of how you can take the same visualization and use it for a different purpose. In this case, we weren't looking at servers or clients. We were saying, do people talk to basically the same people all the time? So if I grab my machine, I log in, the first thing I do is I go and I look at BBC and then CNN and then, I don't know, whatever website. Do I have a consistent thing? Or is it not consistent? And in this case, we even broke it down much more simply and said, you tend to talk to the same number of external IPs all the time. And so if it was the same number all the time, if you had roughly the same number of IPs from point A to point B, then it was the same color. If you were increasing a little bit, but it was close to the same number, then it was another color. And then if it was a lot different, it was another color, and there was a fuzz in between. And I forget exactly how the math worked behind that in terms of making sure that there is an appropriate scaling. The interesting thing here, so we only have one machine that was really active doing this, and you can see that with the red and everything going on. The interesting thing was not that. It's this little one near the bottom here. We have this little bit of change periodically. And what it was is there was this tiny little uptick in the number of machines contacting it, and then it would go away. And then a tiny little uptick the next night, and it would go away. And we're not sure exactly why this was happening. We never did find that out. Unfortunately, the conference network was only around for a week, not even a week. But when we looked at the traffic, there was someone externally who would try to contact that machine every single night, right at the same time. And it was an SSH scan of some sort, if I remember correctly now. And the nice thing about this visualization is it's really hard to detect low and slow if you're looking just at network traffic. But as a visualization, all of a sudden something like that stands out really, really nicely. So again, if you have a specific goal in mind when you're looking at your traffic and saying, let's just see if there's something a little bit different that happens, then visualizations are very nice for that. And the other thing to keep in mind with that is, again, the thought behind it. What is it that we want to visualize and why? How do we process the data first and then look at it? Next reason, visualization for exploration. I have all this data. What does it look like? What's in it? How do I really quickly get a sense or some feeling for what's in the data? And so this was a very, very simple visualization. The basic idea was, at the time I was actually interested in scan activity, so it gives you an idea how many years ago that was, or decades. How many external IPs talk to how many internal IPs over time, and is it consistent? And the idea was that there would be a lot of external IPs that would contact one or two IPs internally, because why, if you're looking at an internal network, would you talk to more than that? Why would you'd probably connect to a web server, and that might be, a web server and maybe something else, some back-end server or something that gets touched. And that would be touched across your border of your network. And then I thought scans would be on the other side because you have a few machines that would be scanning all of your machines internally, and so you'd have some there. And this was on a very large network telescope. And when we graphed it, we got this thing up in the corner that instead of either being a clump on one side and a clump on the other, which is what I was expecting, or in retrospect, what I should have expected is this nice little log line, we had something that had this little wave pattern in it. And we had no idea why. And in fact, the wave pattern disappeared on between May 31st and June 2nd. This is 2004 data, so very old. It reappeared later in, I think, the following February for about a month and then disappeared again. Turns out, and it took us about 1 or 2 years before we finally figured out what was causing this. Turned out this is actually worm traffic. And this is how it disturbs the natural, what you would naturally see for network traffic. And so sometimes you want to use a visualization just to say, what does my traffic look like? And sometimes that will be, oh, and that gives me a good sense of things, and other times it'll be, oh, wait, that just gave me a question, I have no idea what's happening there. And then it will take some time to then go through and figure that out. Visualization is a stepping stone. And this is often forgotten about in the visualization community, or for security visualization. This particular example, the idea is you've gone through your data, you've found 3 IPs, external IPs that you find kind of interesting, and you're trying to figure out what have they looked at internally. So in this case, the bottom part of your ring represents all the rest of the internet. The top half of the ring in red is your internal network. And what I'm seeing here is I've looked at traffic from, I've already extracted out traffic from just these 3 IPs, and you can see that they're touching all of the IPs in my domain up at the top. This is actually called the flow bundle. It's, if I expanded it out, what you would see is that you have all kinds of lines from the 3 at the bottom, and it really occludes things. And so doing the visualization in this way actually really helps with focusing on where you're actually seeing, where the data is actually going. The dark red line that you can see sort of, it's hard to point with a finger, but you can see a dark red line there. That was showing that there's more traffic to one place than any other, and the question then becomes, why is there more traffic there? You can click on that, you can find out what IP that is, and then you can go and search on just that IP and say, what happened with that IP? The purpose of this visualization is to be a stepping stone. I've gone from having data, I'm interested in these 3 IPs, but I have all this traffic. Quickly, what does it look like? What were they touching? Wait, why is there a dark red line there? Why is that IP much more interesting than all the rest? Let's go back, look at just that one, and then find out that yes, that IP had more traffic because they were actually able to compromise that IP, and so hence you see a lot more traffic to it. Visualization for evaluation. So in this case, this is actually not mine. This comes from Dana Zhang and some other folks. Dana was doing her PhD associated with CA Technologies at the time and is now with Google. And what she was looking at is roles and how good are the roles that you have in your organization. And that was defined by looking at how many people you have and what is it they can access. Put that in a grid. Now sort it so it makes a really pretty picture, and you can see the very dark black line. Everyone in that dark black box has access to the exact same stuff. And so it's a very well-defined role. You can call that whatever it happens to be. You're an admin or a nurse or whatever organization you're in, whatever that happens to be. If you look at the top corner where it's kind of fuzzy and gray, what that's showing you is that you have people who are accessing, some have access to stuff that others don't, and it's not a well-defined role. It's kind of fuzzy. And so the question then becomes, should that be a role and everyone should have access to all of that? Is there some way to redefine that? Do I have people who have access to things that they shouldn't have access to? And if you're dealing with really large organizations, the reason this is important is that you end up having a lot of roles. Now take 2 large organizations, merge them. You end up having a lot more roles. And to give an example from the banking industry, you might have 2 banks that merge, and then you might say, oh, well, you should have the role teller. Well, in reality, you end up having teller-bank A and teller-bank B. And there's trying to merge all of these different roles together in a way that's coherent and consistent is actually very difficult. So being able to visualize this and say, how well do my roles actually fit my organization? So what you want to be able to do is have visualizations that will provide an evaluation function for you. Last one. Thanks, last. Visualization is evidence. And unfortunately, I don't have a good, pretty picture to go with this one. How many people here have served on as an expert witness? Anyone? No one? No one else willing to admit it? Try explaining security to a judge and lawyers and a jury potentially who do not have that background. Try to explain network traffic or whatever it is that you happen to be looking at. Heaven forbid you start trying to explain what, for example, DNS is. These are not easy concepts. So what you can do is try to use visualization to help someone else understand what it is that you're doing. And in that case, it becomes more like a visualization as a form of storytelling. How is it that you can use visualizations to help someone else who doesn't have the same background, who doesn't understand what you're doing? And so that ends up being a very important part of visualization. It's one I don't see happen a lot. I mean, I see happen a lot in the boardroom. Someone will be at a whiteboard and they'll sketch something out and show, oh, it looks like this, or think of it this way. But in terms of something more formal, it's not something where, oh, here's a visualization that will help explain this complex topic to someone who doesn't have the background. Now, I've been talking a lot about visualizations, the use of them, what not to do with them. How do you know if you have a good visualization? How do you actually even evaluate something? So you come up with this great idea, you say, hey, look, there's a pretty picture, it makes sense to me.
Show it to a 10-year-old.
Comment, show it to a 10-year-old. Yes and no. So the problem with showing it to a 10-year-old is the 10-year-old, depending on which kind of visualization, if they're trying to detect that there's a security issue in some traffic, do they have the background to be able to evaluate the visualization? And that actually breaks down to two ways. One is you're evaluating the visualization, which showing it to the 10-year-old actually might be really good. The other is you're trying to evaluate the process. You're using a visualization for a reason. Does it actually achieve that goal? And so it's two very different ways of looking at it and two very different ways that you need to evaluate what you're doing. So what's the problems with evaluating a visualization? Who is your target audience? Who is it that needs to do this evaluation? So first of all, trying to evaluate it, typically what happens is you're going to do a user study. How well does this work? Let's look at different users. Ideally, you want to have a lot of users look at it. A lot of people will evaluate it, they'll come back and they'll say, okay, here's how good it is, or here's how realistic it is, here's how well it works. How do you find a large population that has the background that you need to be able to evaluate the visualization? You either have to make the problem it's trying to solve so simple that, again, looking at the 10-year-old, that someone who doesn't have the background can solve it. So you're abstracting away the actual problem to something much simpler. Or if you leave the problem complex, by definition now you've shrunk down the number of users you can use to evaluate it. And if you have a smaller number of users to evaluate it, how well does that actually work? If I have 5 people evaluate it and happen to be friends of mine, can I then go and say this is going to work for this, for, US cert or something? How is that actually transferable? Is there any way to show that that's transferable? Recruitment's a huge issue. So has anyone here ever participated in an evaluation study, user study at all, visualization or anything else? I've got one person. How do you, yay, thank you. How do you even find people who are willing to do this? You all have day jobs. How many of you are willing to take, 5-10 minutes to respond to a survey, let alone a couple of hours to sit down with a visualization, play with it, see how well it works, and then come back and say, oh, and here's all the things that you did wrong, here's everything that needs to be fixed, and here's what I didn't understand, and on top of that, that may or may not be at your desk, you might have to go someplace else to do it. And even if I offer to pay you, chances are I'm not actually able to pay you what you're making at your day job, and then it takes time out of your evening, and why would you do any of this? So recruitment is a huge issue for doing these kinds of evaluations. And especially, I started out with talking about visualization specifically looking at security and specifically looking at network security. In that case, I need expert users. I need people who understand what I'm doing. And so the costs have just gone up. The pool of people I can draw from has just gone down. And the availability of these people has just gone down. Comment?
Couldn't you just, if you wanted a good selection, why couldn't you have just dropped something on, say, Career Builder then? There's a lot of unemployed people.
So the question is, why can't you just drop it on Career Builder or something? There are a lot of unemployed people. There's actually a similar one, Mechanical Turk gets used a lot, but it doesn't have necessarily the same quality of people.
I would add that if they're unemployed, they might be the set that you don't want to evaluate.
Comment, if they're unemployed, they might be the set you don't want to evaluate, which is a very good point. So the thought I had wasn't so much drop it on Career Builder or Mechanical Turk, but you just release it as open source, let it get adopted, and then see how well it works, and people will certainly tell you if they want changes or fixes, or they'll download it and just either not install it or not use it, and so you can't actually tell how well it necessarily worked. You can say, oh, this many people downloaded it, and then I got questions from this many people, but.
Well, and it goes back to the same metrics a call center gets. You only get responses from the dissatisfied. The happy customers you never hear from.
Very good point. Comment was, it goes back to the same principle that call centers operate under, where you only hear from the dissatisfied customers. Whoever calls up and says, hey, I love your product, thank you. All right, who other than? And so recruitment for these kinds of experiments is very much still an issue. That was the visualization itself. There's a deeper issue and a much more difficult one. When you do a visualization, the whole point is for it to be useful. It's supposed to fit inside of a workflow. So how do you do that? And the first part of doing something like that is you have to actually evaluate what is the process, the workflow itself. What is it that people are doing? And how can I make their job easier? And that first step, honestly, in the security community, at least on the academic side, we never do that. We're starting to see it now. I can tell you that there's, I can name like four researchers who are actually going out into SOCs, looking at what people are doing, and then trying to figure out what is the best, just documenting, what is it that people in a SOC do? Because if you don't work in a SOC, how do you know what happens in a SOC? And people who work in SOCs don't necessarily want to tell you what it is that they're doing. And oftentimes there's a trust issue there too. They don't want to tell you what you're doing because they're not sure how you're going to use that information. So people are just starting to do this. I know one project that's been going for almost 2 years now. It took them a year before the SOC started trusting them and talking to them. They've been embedded in the SOC working as analysts. For 1 year they were told, oh, just do this thing here and don't talk to us. So once we finally figure out what the workflow is and start looking at it, we might be able to say, oh, people spend a lot of time doing this thing. Is there some way that we can make this thing easier for them or faster? And that's hopefully sometimes a visualization would be appropriate in that case. So you need to evaluate how are the existing tools used, figure out where you want to actually put in a visualization. You've done your visualization, now you need to say how well did the visualization work. You need to go back up to the same organizations. You need to convince them to install this visualization, and you need to convince them to start using it instead of how they were already doing things. How many people here actually enjoy change? A few of you. It depends on the change. And so, I'm doing my day job. I know if I do this, I can get it done. Do I want to have the learning curve of going over and using some other way of looking at something and trying it out, seeing if and it might be the case that it works better and I'm really, really happy. But it's the same thing as installing new software and new tools and saying, okay, let's try this out and see how well it works. There are some people who like doing this, and there are some people who really don't like doing this. And so how do you find the right individuals and the right organizations who would welcome doing something like that?
In the SOCs that you've been in, Is there any incentives to, from a performance standpoint, for time to resolve, time to identify, time to mitigate, that you could put this is your current visualization, this is the proposed visualization, we're gonna actually allow you to use one or the other and let the marketplace of the incentives in the SOC determine which is the winner?
That's a very good question. So the question was, essentially, is there any way you can incentivize the users? Are there any SOCs where they have incentives such that you could say, here's one way of doing it, here's the second way, and let it play out as if it was a marketplace, whichever one works best based on the incentives, then say, essentially, this is the one to use. So in one particular SOC, so I'll give you the two extremes. In one SOC, the answer is absolutely no. It was very much, this is our job, we have to get it done, and you would need essentially management support to say, all right, take the time to at least do this and figure out if it works better, or create that marketplace to begin with. And there was also sort of a trust issue again. They didn't want to trust new software they weren't familiar with. So that was the one extreme. On the other extreme, I've seen SOCs where you might have users that you're given, on average, 5 minutes to resolve something. Determine if it's something that should be escalated, determine if it's a false positive, determine if you can solve it in 5 minutes, but you've got roughly 5 minutes per incident, because there's just that many incidents coming through for the number of analysts. In a case like that, they kind of want it already proven. And if you could already show it, then they would welcome that change, but you need to already show that this is going to provide some sort of speed up or change in their, improvement actually in their ability. Management for that particular SOC probably would invest in trying to see if that would improve it, but it would be not just release it in SOC and go for it, it would be a much more of a separate kind of evaluation. So it really depends on the SOC, depends on the level of the SOC and their culture. And not all SOCs are created equal. The nice thing about being able to do something like that is it gives you a very realistic evaluation of how well the visualization you have actually works. And you don't just do it through a survey and have someone say, oh yeah, your visualization is pretty, love it. And you go away and you say, hey, this was really great, and people love it, and they were just lying to get you out of their office. Not that that would happen. So what are the conclusions from all of this? And there are a couple. Well, there's three. One, don't do what I did to the kids. Number two, if you're going to do visualizations or try to actually use visualizations in your work, put some thought behind it. What is the problem you're trying to solve? And then how will a visualization help you? And then say, what is the right visualization? Don't start with, here's the pretty picture, here's a hammer, where's a nail. What problem are you trying to solve first? And the holy grail of all this, and this is my favorite visualization of all time. Get lots of nods on that one. Napoleon's March. This is a beautiful visualization. It shows all the troops that started out for Napoleon's March, and the thickness of the line shows you how many troops there were. And you can see as it thins, as they get closer and closer to Moscow, as people were dying. And then when they were defeated, just outside Moscow, if I remember correctly, into the black line is the retreat going back to France. And you can see there's some rivers in there, so all of a sudden the line will go from a little bit thicker to a little bit thinner as people die trying to cross the river. So the number of people that actually returned from the march was extremely small. And you can see there's one branch that kind of got lost along the way and then met up with them again on the way back. Beautiful visualization. That's the holy grail. Is there some way that we can do a visualization like that for security that helps analysts not just understand their data, gain insight from their data and what it is that they're looking at? No, here's what happened, and here's why, and ideally, here's what I do about it. I know this one doesn't say here's what I do about it, but I'll throw that one in at the end. Here's what I do about it, and that's really the holy grail. It's some way you can provide a visualization that provides that for your end analyst. And with that, I'm going to conclude. I don't know if there are any more questions, or you got them all up during.
Mainly a comment. When you ask about evaluating visualization and so forth, I actually intuitively do this on a daily basis. We're surrounded by bad communications, and if anything, the computer revolution has made it possible for more people to produce more crap. And it's stunning to me. And my wife is a cartographer, by the way, a GIS expert, so she spends a lot of time on these same issues. The single best reference for getting up to speed on this is Edward Tufte's The Visual Display of Quantitative Information. I recommend it highly. And if you want to see how you can destroy this stuff, go Google for Lincoln's Gettysburg Address in PowerPoint, which Tufte called independently a masterpiece. It's important. I love this display, and I applaud what you're doing with this. Just as an aside, I actually develop and teach a half-day tutorial on writing security advisories because it is so easy for people to get information the wrong way, especially in the international community. So we really need to spend more time on how we communicate. So I salute that.
Thank you. To summarize all that comment,
Sorry.
sorry, I should have handed you the mic, actually.
Tufte is the main thing.
Main one for people interested in visualization, Edward Tufte has actually 4 books out right now on information visualization. They're fantastic. Go take a look. If you want to see how not to do things, Gettysburg
Address in PowerPoint.
Thank you. Gettysburg Address in PowerPoint.
Brilliant.
Go Google for it. And the third thing, and actually something I didn't pull out here, so I'm glad you did, a really important thing for visualizations, what you're trying to do is communicate. And so the big issue really is how do you communicate to people in such a way that you're not misunderstood? And the example was actually writing security advisories, because people can read those and completely misunderstand what you're saying as well. Now, how is it that you communicate effectively to your audience?
Hey, my name's Jeff Mercer. I don't need a microphone.
Okay.
I really don't.
Oh, you're that Jeff.
Have you done any of this visualization analysis and stuff with metadata beyond just the IP addresses and ports? Have you done like host names, length of host names, or the character frequency host names, or user agent strings, or things like that?
So the question is, have I done any of the visualization work using other types of metadata? So for example, host data and such. The short answer is no. I haven't had a chance to look into that, so the funding I receive is specifically to look at flow data, and hence my focus very much on flow level data for all the visualizations. I'm actually starting to look with a team from the University of San Francisco right now at some firewall data and saying, all right, is there some way to present firewall data that helps an end user? And I've left it completely open like that and said, hey, students, and not let them know that there are things not to do to see what it is that they come up with. But we'll see what comes out. But I haven't done a higher level metadata with, for example, host names, length of host names.
I think you should, because your work's good.
Oh, thank you.
And I think that's actually going to be the next phase forward is information security, because in my experience, when I start seeing lots of requests for host names that are 80 characters long, something weird's going on. And sometimes it's because someone's stupid, but sometimes it's malware. So things like that, I think, but there's a lot of deep math analysis that I have no clue how to do. I need people like you to do it for me and make it into something where I can go, these are bad, these are good.
So, summarization there, I've just been given a task to do. And someone actually over here mentioned Splunk. Splunk is actually a good tool for using for doing kinds of security analysis. They have a lot of good tools for doing security analysis. And then my other comment back would be particularly looking at the host names and such. For some of these, some signatures would be better than visualizations. And so trying to determine what signatures you should have should actually be the first step. But yeah, I would like to play with other visualizations as well. You'll take the mic, okay.
You kind of alluded to the use of visualization before signature. I got lots of stuff that if I know to make the signature is trivial. But if I try out a priori to, this is what I assume is happening in the field, I get burned every single time. So my most common use of visualizations, and I mean like literally like every few days, is okay, I have some combination of dimensions that appears to be interesting. Let's shove it into a graph through some presently unstructured way until I see something that, okay, well that's where the signature path goes. My question for you is, what are the best exploratory patterns for multidimensional data that take me from, I've got a pile of dimensions which has aggressively non-random interrelations. What is the best way to look at it so that the next step can be writing a signature?
Well, thank you for the trivially easy question. So actually that pulls out a little bit of other things too. Data mining essentially, because what you're trying to do is a visual way of doing data mining. So the question becomes, can you throw it in Weka, for example? Can you do some basic cluster analysis? I don't have a good tool that can just say throw data at it and it'll give you pretty pictures and you can scan them until you see something that looks interesting. I wish I did.
I really wish you did.
But I like that as a research project. Find the Uber visualization that will help you find the signature, or figure out where to look for a signature.
It's
I wish
certainly
I-
my day-to-day.
Yeah. I'm sorry.
Oh, I have one other question.
Uh-oh. Are you allowed to ask another one now?
No. You're the self-similarity graph, where you were doing visualization of roles.
Yeah.
What was actually happening there? Because that's useful. Like that was like a visualization that had insight, but I have no idea what the units are.
Cool. How do you know you said that?
Can we put that slide back up?
Yeah. So I can get back to it. Okay. So that's the visualization. So what was on one axis are my users.
Okay.
And what's on the other axis is what they have permissions to access.
So subject and object.
Subject and object.
Is there some sorting going?
There is sorting going on, and if you read the paper, I believe it talks about the sorting there, how to sort it so that you get the really nice, pretty clumps, essentially, because that's what you need to be able to. If you just had your users randomly and all the system files or whatever random, then you would have random gray everywhere. And so there is a sorting that's happening there that helps you then say, all right, here's how the things will cluster, essentially a type of clustering.
Okay.
And yeah, go grab the paper, it'll give you a lot more details. And if it doesn't give you the details, shoot me an email and I'll happily go and track those down for you. But yeah, and then it just said, and here's now, because I have a really nice well-defined block, that means I actually have a really nice well-defined role.
I'd like your impression or feedback. This is coming from Ray Konopka from UI Design. And his rule of thumb is that the proper UI design and implementation is one that doesn't need a help file. So can that be applied, in your opinion, can that be applied or should that be applied as the metric for visualization? As if you have a properly designed visualization, it needs no explanation, it needs no help file, it conveys the meaning that you intended to convey.
Yes and no. Yes, so Napoleon's March, for example, is exactly that. So that, to me, would be a holy grail. I'm trying to think of what a visualization that could even come close to meeting that metric would be with a security, looking at network structure, because you need to understand. Let's try back here. You need to understand, so this hates me.
It hates me.
You need, pardon?
This is actually not the microphone. We
Oh.
leave it by another one. There's an anti-feedback, so if you hit it, it's worse. So
Okay, so stand and don't move. Got it. I'm trying to think for a security field, even what that could possibly look like. You have to have so much background knowledge, and then and the visualizations to me, the problem that you're running into is that there's no obvious visualization or representation for something that's virtual. It makes sense if you're dealing with something physical, So for example, GIS representations that actually have something in the physical world. But something that's virtual, how do you display that in such a way that's intuitive? And so I would say a holy grail, but I don't know.
I do not propose to have the answer or be such a visualization designer.
Yeah.
It was, can we take this metric from user interface and map it into visualization?
So I would say we can take that metric from user interface, map it to visualization. I would say that when applied to network security, and probably security in general, that we would always fail at that metric.
Clearly what we need are green letters in a font moving slowly down a screen.
Yeah.
Comic Sans. In Comic Sans.
In Comic Sans, yes. Okay.
You know, let me just plug this a minute. I think that one of the problems is that we may be trying to decide, here's the solution, here's how we need to develop the visualization for this. And I think one of the problems we need to tackle is how to establish a situation where when we realize something may be happening, how can we quickly visualize that so that other people understand? And let me give an example. I'm trying to think of a graphical example, but the one that I remember is from a long time ago when somebody was attacking in the university environment and they were using one of the main terminal rooms. It happened to be the mainframe computer terminal room, a bunch of 3270s and so forth. And law enforcement was summoned, and all of this was new to them. They didn't know. They had to see something anomalous, something that was interesting for them. And we knew exactly where the guy was sitting. He's right there. There's the perp. Go arrest him. And they're like, we don't see him doing anything wrong. Okay? It was a stalemate. At that moment, the mainframe crashed. In the room of 42 people got up and went to the break room. And this one guy was oblivious to the fact that the mainframe was crashed. He was busy using the terminal server and going elsewhere. He wasn't using the mainframe. So all of a sudden, he was that one person. And of course, the officer said, now we understand. Right? I mean, you know, it was new. But I mean, the point is that we need to be prepared. Like Marcus Ronham's network flight recorder ages ago, that was great because it gave you some simple visual tools that rapidly communicated what people needed to do, what people needed to be looking for. We need to be prepared to have the tools available to help explain what it is we're going after. And I think a lot of the problems with the existing tools is people have said, this is a problem that will need to be solved, and we have this tool that does it, but then no one ever has an opportunity or need to use it in that particular way. And so then we get a setback because people say, we put all this work into this, it's not been successful. Right.
Good point. And I think my time is up, and I'm standing between a whole bunch of people and beer. I'm going to say thank you very much.